A Rekopani Wildlife Transformation and Land Reform Project presents an investment opportunity, investing in an industry that is vibrant, eco-friendly, conservation-driven, with economic transformation and positive land reform objectives. Why invest in the wildlife industry of South Africa? Wildlife tourism has become the leading and fastest growing sector in the tourism sector, with 88% of all visitors to South Africa, which is 13.4 million, indicating that they are here on holiday. It is estimated that 50% of 12.1 million tourists on holiday will incorporate a wildlife experience in their visit, and on average spend 3,486 Rand per day, on which is the biggest portion, which is 75%, on accommodation, food and transport. The turnover of wildlife tourism segment of the wildlife industry, given the above assumptions, is calculated to be 104 billion Rand. This, to a large extent, is evenly matched by the multiplier effect that wildlife tourism has on 4x4 trails, airlines, outdoor equipments, hotels, etc. Currently, sandparks equate to 3.7 million hectares, while the 6,330 exempted privately owned wildlife farms equate to approximately 14.7 million hectares, open a huge opportunity for further growth and investment into the wildlife tourism industry. The strength to wildlife tourism is that it creates jobs. It ensures better faculty utilization. It, however, needs better management and higher capital investments, especially in facilities. At the beginning of the 20th century, many wildlife populations in southern Africa were depleted as a result of disease epidemics and overexploitations by humans. In an attempt to reverse this, colonial governments centralized control of wildlife and tried to protect it by banning all consumptive utilizations at both commercial and subsistence levels. Although these changes were intended as conservation measures, they had the opposite effect on private land because farmers had no incentive to protect wildlife. Instead of contributing to income, wildlife became a burden to landowners by competing with domestic livestock and harboring diseases. And the outcome was either neglect of the wild species or deliberate eradication. In addition, livestock farming was actively encouraged through government subsidies and massive state investments in infrastructure, disease control and research, rendering wildlife even less desirable. During the 1950s, there was growing recognition among international ecologists that productivity of wildlife could be quite high, that it might provide an alternative source of meat to domestic livestock, and that exterminating all wildlife animals to make way for domestic livestock was unnecessary and not the most efficient use of land, especially in marginal areas. The first regional research in the benefits of wildlife on private land was conducted in southern Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe, by Desmond and Mosman in 1959. In South Africa, once it was recognized that harvesting wildlife for commercial purposes could be sustainable, there was still some initial resistance to use private land in this way. Instead, commercial consumptive use of wildlife was encouraged on state land in the 1960s, including flagship reserves like the Kruger National Park. Despite the lack of government assistance, wildlife ranching had been growing on private land during this time, driven by the farmers themselves, and in 1964 there were between 2,000 to 3,000 farms in the former Transvaal using one or two game species as a source of income. With the growing knowledge that wildlife ranching was ecologically and financially sustainable, and in some instances more so than regular agriculture, with more growing financial incentives, wildlife ranching has grown tremendously over the last 25 years. Other social, political, economic and ecological motivations that have risen since the switch to to a democratic government in 1994 have also contributed towards the growth of this sector. One motivation was the profit margins for traditional farming practices declining due to the decrease of agricultural subsidies and the emergence of large-scale feedlot-centered production systems. Occurrence of incentive breeding of high-value species on surveyed ranches, deregulation of the agricultural sector by the World Trade Organization, as well as the agricultural sector's loss of political leverage in Parliament have played an important role in the promoting of the switch from stock farming to wildlife ranching. Economic incentives were the predominant factors causing many farmers to switch from pastoralism to wildlife ranching. There was a greater potential for foreign exchange earnings from trophy hunting and tourism than stock farming. An ecological reason for switching to wildlife ranching was that the game species caused less degradation to the rangeland in comparison with traditional livestock. Over the last 4 years, the South African government has recognized that the national economy needs to adopt resource efficiency, production practices, and progressively restructure away from energy-intensive industries towards new green industries, which are financially viable and internationally competitive on the long run. The South African wildlife ranching industry has been flagged as a potential strong sector of green economy development, but a detailed assessment of the social, economic, and conservation value of the wildlife ranching industry has not yet been conducted. The wildlife ranching sector is supported by 4 main pillars: ecotourism, live sales and breeding of high value, trophy and biltong hunting, and processed game products. The first official live wildlife auction in South Africa was held in Limpopo Province in 1975, when 128 animals were sold. The number of animals sold annually increased almost every year to reach a peak of 21,101 animals in 2004, and then increased again to 23,963 animals in 2013 and 29,281 in 2014. Since 2004, there has been an increase in the number of high-value animals sold at live auctions. Why invest in the wildlife industry in South Africa? The South African Department of Trade and Industry Trade Policy and Strategy Framework states, the government's broad development strategy aims to promote and accelerate economic growth along a path that generates sustainable, decent job opportunities in order to reduce poverty and extreme inequalities. The foreign direct investment, or FDI, is a crucial source of finance for development and can provide significant contribution to sustainable development across all sectors. The goal in itself is not to attract the FDI. The goal is to reap the benefits of sustainable development that FDI brings. The FDI has been described as a package of resources such as capital, technology, knowledge, and skills that foreign investors can harness to transfer to a host state, generating employment and increasing fiscal revenues, stimulating domestic demand, and in this way encourage entrepreneurship and local enterprise development, thereby supporting sustainable economic growth. South Africa has in recent decades been an attractive destination for FDI, and it has exceedingly strong institutions and a vibrant, functioning democracy. South Africa ranked amongst the most open jurisdictions for FDI in the world. The overall growing trend of FDI into South Africa since 1994 accounts for 42% of the GDP. South Africa ranks as the 13th most attractive FDI destination globally. The wildlife industry is a sweet spot with further growth opportunities in all the above segments, especially that of breeding game, as it has lowered the barrier to entry. The total turnover of the wildlife industry is estimated at 122.7 billion rand. making it the largest industry compared to other agricultural industries. Given the success of the wildlife industry, the commercialization of certain other endangered game species may need to be reconsidered. By legalizing trade in certain endangered game and products, it may be possible to save these species from the next generation and turn off threats into a benefit and potential contributor to economic growth for South Africa. Additionally, the game industry is well adapted to drought conditions in Southern Africa and offers needed diversification opportunities to producers in the region. This is especially true as agricultural competition from neighboring countries north of South Africa is expected to increase. The wildlife industry is therefore expected to continue to grow. Over the past 2 decades, the game breeder sector only really got going with the developments and investment in game catching, game transport, and game auctioning facilities. Without this investment, numerous ranchers did not even consider live sales as a marketing avenue for their game. Another contributor factor that unlocked the value of breeding stock was the development of a game insurance product that can be used as a risk management tool, especially during the stress period during game capturing and the adjusting period after the sale of the game. The transformation of the industry has the potential to unlock economic growth while offering good return on investment for an investor.